Thank you so much. I'm just going to start again very quickly. Welcome, everyone. Tonight we're talking about pathological demand avoidance syndrome, and we're just really going to be focusing a lot on strategies tonight. So when we think about PDAS or PDA, we're really looking at a profile of autism or some traits that are often connected with autism. So we see things where they're resisting and avoiding the ordinary demands of life. Just get my notes in front of me as well. And that they use social strategies as part of avoiding demands. They actually appear sociable on the surface, but they actually really don't have great understanding. And excessive mood swings and impulsivity. They can sometimes be really comfortable in role play and pretense, and sometimes to an extreme extent to where there's the lines between reality and pretense can become blurred. And we can see children who take on personas of an animal or of a person or a character for really long periods of time, and obsessive behaviors that's often directed at other people. So they'll become obsessed with a member of family. Yes, so it can become very intense and very, very difficult to manage. They have a need for control, and they have a response as if everything is a threat. So, they often have low self-esteem. They often use threats of violence and extreme language towards others. This is most often directed at their parents and family, and it's often masked outside of the family home, and that can be a real challenge. Violence towards themselves, others, and property, and that can be very intense for families as well. Communication delays. Now, often with their communication, their expressive language is great if it's about a topic that they're interested in. So they can wax lyrical about the things that they're interested in. They can argue like a bush lawyer to distract and avoid, and that's where they use social communication as a tool of avoidance. But their pragmatic language skills are often really, really delayed. So when we're thinking about pragmatic language, that's about reciprocity in communication and conversation. So that's turn taking in conversations and shared attention. So I have the capacity to allow you to talk about something you're interested in a conversation, whether I'm really interested in it or not. But because you're interested in it and I'm interested in you, I will share that with you with equal shared time. But a child with a pragmatic language delay can't see the point in pretending that they're actually interested when they're really not. And they actually feel like they're being disingenuous and lying to actually show interest in something that they're not interested in. And so they find it very difficult to reconcile, well, why would I listen about Minecraft when I'm actually not interested in Minecraft? I'm actually only interested in Splatoon. And why would I waste my time listening about Minecraft if it's something I'm not interested in? So that can be really, really difficult. All right. There's a lot of confusion around ODD and PDA. So let's just have a bit of a think about this. So we see extreme anxiety in ADHD and in autism. And in ADHD, we see ODD. In ASD, we see PDA. Now, I'm distracting myself with having the chat open, so I'm just going to close that so I can't see it. Because I'm seeing a very special person's to me name there, and I just need to get it out of the way because I'm getting distracted by that special person. All right, so when we think about ODD, we see that children and young people will go toe to toe and just say no, and they will absolutely argue. And we see that in PDA as well. They will say no and they will argue. However, with ODD, they're not overwhelmed by everyday demands, and they can usually go to school and they can usually tolerate the demands that their body places on them. So often kids or young people or children or even adults with PDA become really overwhelmed by the demands that their body places on them. So toileting becomes an issue. So they can be overwhelmed with the demand to do a poo. And they cannot cope with that. And they can't cope with the sensory overload of having to wipe. And so they try not to poo so they don't have to wipe. And then they end up with an impacted bowel. They become overwhelmed with the demand of their body to sleep. And so they try and stay awake and they end up with disordered sleep. So this is all about not being able to manage the normal demands of day-to-day life. Whereas a child with ODD, they can usually manage those things. So that's kind of some of the really big difference. The other big difference in PDA, the autistic obsession is often more about avoiding demands than it is about anything else. They may have other special interests, but their obsession becomes avoiding demands, and you don't actually see that obsession in ODD. So I just think that's something that is really notable. And I've been learning more and more, all the time learning, all the time reading. And so I'm getting a better understanding as well. So I'm really excited to be able to share with you this greater understanding over time. So as I said before, it's actually task and demand avoidance is the act of putting more energy into avoiding the task than it actually takes to do it. So that can look like asking the same question over and over, arguing and arguing and arguing, and going to the loo, or hurting themselves. I had a young person collapse on the floor the other day because they just couldn't cope with the demands. And I can't get up, my legs won't work. And that took an hour of support to be able to get them up off the floor. And that's just that being overwhelmed with the demands of every day. And just the energy that it took for them to transition to bed was too much for them. Any questions or anything yet, Kez?
I just saw something in the chat, but like avoiding the shower for 2 hours.
Yeah.
Shower.
Yeah. Or avoiding the shower for 3 months. And like wanting to have a shower, but just not being able to have a shower. So when we think about the demands that these kids have to cope with, there's direct, indirect, implied, a consequence, and self-imposed. And they are all huge demands on them, and they become really, really overwhelmed by them. So let's just have a little bit more of a look at that. So we have indirect demands from our body or our environment. So body functions, we talked about that before. There's kind of this indirect demand that if you drop something on the floor accidentally, or even on purpose, that you should pick it up. If you have a drink and you use a cup, you should put it on the sink. If you use a plate or you open a packet of something, there's an indirect demand that you put it away. If you take a cup and plate into your bedroom, there's a demand that you should take it to the kitchen and return it. Now, I know there's some normal teenage behavior where they won't do that. And we go to the cupboard and we've got no plates or cups and we go and fishing in the teenager's bedroom and we can find them. But it's more about the extreme. Manners and social norms and mores can actually really become a huge demand. Work. So going to work for an adult with PDA can be really overwhelming. Completing a task, saying thank you or apologizing, or even greetings. So somebody coming to visit and saying hi, that can be overwhelming, because if they reply with hi, there's going to be another question. So it's actually easier to be mute socially. Praise. So if I've done it well today and you praise me for it, you're going to expect me to do it well again tomorrow. And that becomes an implied demand. Being successful and being able to do something. So I've successfully done a math sheet or I've completed a task. You are then going to want me to do it again. Birthdays and other celebrations can come with huge implied demands. If somebody gives me a gift and I don't like it, what am I going to do? What do I say? I'm just going to go, oh, I've already got one of those. Or don't you know I don't like Minecraft? Or there's all these demands in those celebrations that are really, really difficult for me. Lots of young people with PDA and autism really struggle with wrapped gifts and become very anxious around gifts being wrapped. Then we have direct demands. So requests, instructions, directions, suggestions, recipes, instructions on work for school. This is the topic. You've got to write a 500-word essay, or you've got to do 100-word responses to these 20 questions, or you've got to copy this word into your word list every day of the week. Those things become huge demands that become totally overwhelming for them. The other thing I want to talk about, and for people who've come to my webinars before, they'll go, okay, yes, Bobbi, I know. But it's actually a great reminder to remember about ability versus capacity. So often we know that our young person has the ability to get up, get dressed, do the things they need to do, go to school and be successful for a whole day at school. And we know that they have the ability to do that because they've done it before. What's variable, though, is their emotional capacity at any given time to access that ability. And that is confusing for parents, teachers, and the young person themselves. Because when they don't have that emotional capacity, it is not a I won't go to school, it's a I can't go to school. And it's often around trauma and looking at things like post-traumatic stress for them. Post-traumatic stress, we only get that when we've been in a life-threatening situation. For our kids, often school is a life-threatening situation. So it's about whether it is a real or perceived life-threatening situation. So often they experience great trauma and being misunderstood. I had this amazing conversation today with one of my families that I was meeting with this most amazing mum who I really respect. And we were talking about bullying and actually about workplace bullying. And she said to me that once upon a time, bullying was described to her as a bee sting, and that a bee sting hurts. So every time you get bullied, it actually really hurts you. And you can kind of get stung and you have a reaction and you heal, and get stung and have a reaction and then you heal. But at some point, you may have an anaphylactic response to a bee sting. And that bullying is a little bit like that. So you can get bullied and you can get bullied and you recover, and you get bullied and you recover. And then you can get bullied in exactly the same way, but you kind of have a disproportionate response. And that's what anaphylaxis is. It's your body having a disproportionate response to poison. And then we went on to unpack that a bit more and go, I said, well, what is your EpiPen to workplace bullying? And so, okay, that was a new thought around how do you recover from anaphylaxis? You use EpiPen. And then we went on to talk about, okay, so I'm actually allergic to bees and I do have an EpiPen for bee stings. But if I know I'm going to be outside in the garden and there's bees around, I actually make sure I take an antihistamine before I go into that situation, before I go out into the garden, so that if, God forbid, I do get stung by a bee, my time is extended to get to the EpiPen, because it kind of helps reduce the reaction. So then we talked about, what's your antihistamine going into a workplace bullying situation to reduce the impact of workplace bullying? And I actually said to her, I was going to share this analogy tonight because it's a little bit like what our kids with PDA experience. So they kind of can cope with going to school. They can cope with going to school. They can cope with saying hello. They can cope with following directions and instructions. And then one day it's like they just can't. And they struggle, but they kind of manage. And often there just gets a day where they just cannot get out of bed. And that is like the anaphylactic response to being overwhelmed by demands. And then as families and therapists, we've got to kind of work out what's that EpiPen that is actually going to support them to get going again. And how do we then use an antihistamine so that it's safe for them to actually go into potentially risky situations again? And I just thought this was the most amazing analogy. And I'm actually going to overlay this analogy in lots of the therapy and support that I put in place for these families now. So it's just a different way of looking at it. But I just was firing off on all cylinders and had all of these different pictures come to be in my mind after hearing this analogy. And often I find young people respond really well to analogies. And I was working with, I had a session with a PDA young person this evening, and they love being on YouTube and Discord and posting videos, but they've had a lot of bullying on Discord in particular and YouTube. And so I was concerned about them being back doing this again, because nothing's actually changed. There's just been a period of time gone, but they actually haven't developed any more skills to cope with negative feedback. So I actually shared this analogy with them, and I said, I really want to work on an EpiPen for you. What can we do to support you if you get bullied on YouTube and Discord again? But more than that, what can we put in place as your antihistamine to make sure you're protected along the way? And that opened up some discussion I would not normally be able to have with them. So I hope that's a bit of a helpful analogy that you might be able to use either with your child or in your workplace. I think it can apply in a lot of different areas. Kez, any thoughts?
No questions as yet.
Okay. it's a new thought for me, so I may not have articulated it as amazingly as I could, but I'm like, oh, I love sharing new things and learning new things. What I want to do next is go through the extreme demand avoidance questionnaire and have a bit of a talk about it. It's something you can Google, and I'll make sure that we actually put a link to it on the website with the webinar and the resources that we normally put there, because Aisha will go through and she'll pick up all of the resources that she would normally put in chat for you. But if you just Google extreme demand avoidance questionnaire, it'll pop up and it's a fillable PDF that you can download. So let's have a little look at it. So obsessively resists and avoids ordinary demands and requests, complains about illness or physical incapacity when avoiding a request, is driven by the need to be in charge, finds everyday pressures like having to go on a school trip, visit the dentist, go to the toilet, eat something different, eat in a different place, overwhelming. Quite often will tell other children how they should behave, but doesn't feel that these rules apply to them. Mimics adult mannerisms and styles. Will use a parental or teacher tone to tell other children off. Has difficulty complying with demands unless they're carefully presented. Takes on roles or characters from TV or real life and acts them out. So this is actually a test question. So and a control. So shows little shame or embarrassment, might throw a tantrum in public and not be embarrassed. This would not be a behavior we would normally see. We might see it occasionally, but I would think it's not mostly true for most children with PDA. They're more likely to do that at home and mask in public, unless they're actually in total meltdown and they're actually not coping at all. Invents fantasy worlds or games and acts them out. Good at getting around others and making them do as they want. Seems unaware of the differences between themselves and authority figures. So they actually think that they have exactly the same rights to an opinion as anyone else, especially adults. One of the really big spaces this becomes a problem is at school. If a child, often they will have a really quite a good IQ. And so, or they'll have a really good IQ in their area of special interest. So if their area of special interest is chemistry and a teacher uses an incorrect name to explain something, they may well correct the teacher. And it looks really disrespectful and not at all helpful and can cause them all sorts of dramas in that space. Yes, Kez?
Yeah, so Tracy's just asked, is taking on roles and characters the same as the children that take on an American accent when they speak?
Correct. Yeah. So it's then seeing YouTube and TV and seeing that as a confident way of speaking and then adopting that. So yes, very much so.
And just one more. In terms of the bee sting analogy, any suggestions on how to manipulate that analogy to suit children with specific obsessive interests such as video games?
Yes. Let me come back to that. I think I did okay with the young person that I worked with tonight around their posting on YouTube and that sort of thing. But let me think about that. And if I can't come up with something before the end of the webinar, I'll put it on Facebook.
Yeah.
So don't worry, I'll definitely come back to you.
I think the bee sting and the antihistamine stuff is great. And there's just another one. Is it more common for PDA kids to have a higher IQ?
No. I did originally think this. You know, a few years ago, I thought this, but I've actually seen children with classic autism and a lower IQ, so ASD level 3, absolutely having PDA. Yeah.
Sorry,
But
Bob.
we miss it because they're nonverbal.
Yeah. Just one more. If a child has been diagnosed with ADHD and ASD, how do we differentially diagnose between ODD and PDA?
They can have both. Sorry, I know you didn't want to hear that. But they're more likely to have the PDA. So I guess you can tell around that, are they able to do everyday tasks, or do they actually find everyday demands overwhelming? That would kind of be where you would go, is it ODD or is it PDA?
Your comment was very helpful. They thank you for it.
Oh, great. All right, let's look at some more of this assessment tool. If pressurized to do something, they may have a meltdown, like scream, tantrum, hit or kick. So that can be any of those kinds of demands that we place on them. Likes to be told they've done a good job. So this is a control. They actually don't like to be told they've done a good job. They find that overwhelming. Or they enjoy it in the moment and then they become overwhelmed on reflection. So being very, very circumspect with praise is very, very important. Mood changes very rapidly. And this can be very confusing for parents. Yes, Kes?
Just another comment. It seems like the items are consistent with narcissism criteria. What would be the most defining difference besides avoidance?
No, it's the avoidance that is the difference. It's the obsession with avoiding demands. So yes, it really can present as narcissistic personality disorder because it's all about them and what they want and what they need. And because they have impaired theory of mind as well, and they're not able to experience empathy from other people or easily, or show empathy easily, they look like they're narcissistic. So, but it really is that demand avoidance that is the differentiator there.
Great, thanks, Bobbi.
Knows what to do or say to upset specific people. And this is actually a part of the delayed and impaired theory of mind. So it's not so much about wanting to upset them. It's about wanting them to mirror their level of distress, to experience empathy. Because what we do as adults is we try and stay really even and go, oh, I can see you're really upset, or, oh, it looks like you're really angry, or I'm hearing you're really angry. And we try and stay really, really calm ourselves. So what they do, they actually experience that as not being seen, or their level of distress being invisible. So what they do is they actually increase their expression of their level of distress more and more all of the time, to try and get the other person to be showing that they do experience that level of distress. And then what can happen is, once us as parents or therapists or teachers or family members lose the plot and go, oh, I've had enough of this, I just can't do this anymore, they're likely to go, oh, you've got it. They might laugh with relief of being seen and somebody actually showing them that they feel their level of distress. And that can be seen as being really narcissistic and almost sociopathic in laughing when they get somebody else to be upset. But that is just their experience of empathy. Yes, Kez?
Sandra just made a good comment around that. It's like the reaction their behaviour causes helps them to regulate and be in control.
Yes, it does help them to regulate and be in control, but it's actually a little bit different to that. It is, they actually experience empathy because they can see somebody showing the level of distress that they feel. So they feel seen in that. So there is a level of control, but it's also about being seen.
Yeah.
And that somebody else is actually, they can say, oh yeah, that's it. See that, how upset you are now? That's how upset I feel all of the time. So yes, there's control, but there's also being seen and experiencing empathy. They blame or oh, sorry. Let me go back. Come on, there we go. They blame or target a particular person, and that's often around that experience of empathy. But it can also be that autistic obsession as well. Denies behaviour they've committed even when caught red-handed. Makes an effort to maintain their reputation with peers. Oh, it seems as if they're distracted from within. And that they kind of often go into an internal shell and often dissociate because they become so overwhelmed. They do mask and they will make an effort to maintain their reputation with their peers for as long as they can. But it's not just with their peers. It can be with their teachers. It can be with pediatricians, psychologists, and other therapists. So sometimes you'll have a child who's absolutely losing it and not able to leave the house. You force them into the car, you get them to the pediatrician, and they come in and they sit there and, oh yes, no, I'm really not very worried about things. And they'll make eye contact and they'll do all of the right social masking. And then they'll get out to the car and they will lose it at you. And it can be an absolute nightmare. So actually getting assessments done can be very, very difficult. And you end up looking like a crazy loon as a parent, and it's just horrible. Uses outrageous or shocking behavior to get out of doing something. I've seen kids run out in front of cars, develop pseudo seizure syndromes, hurt themselves on purpose, make themselves sick on purpose, just have a huge meltdown and run incredibly late so you can't get out the door. And that is something that can significantly impact siblings over a number of years and lead to great distress and great resentment. Have bouts of extreme emotional responses to small events. Social interaction always has to be on their own terms because it's got to be about what they can manage. They prefer to interact with others in an adopted role. So they can do really well. I've got a young person who the other day was at school and couldn't participate in the activities, in the sporting activities, but they were able to be the MC. So they were able to adopt the role as an MC for the whole day and read out all the results and read all of the scripts out for being the MC. And then they had a huge meltdown when they got home. So they were able to really be successful in that adopted role. And we don't often think about student as an adopted role, but often their masking will be as a successful, competent student at school, and they can take on the role of a successful student, and that can help them to maintain going to school for quite some time until the experience of the anxiety and the panic becomes life-threatening for them. They attempt to negotiate better terms with adults and they just do that all the time because they believe they have a right to negotiate with adults. And was passive or difficult to engage as an infant. This is a control. Often they're very engaging as an infant, or they can be not engaging as an infant because right from an infant, they were overwhelmed by the demands of their body. They were overwhelmed by the demands of people to make eye contact and to speak and to sit up and to crawl. So that's a bit of a 50-50 one there. Any other thoughts or comments, Karen?
Just this questionnaire, where can they find it? Will we put it on our website, I imagine?
Yeah, we will. But if you just Google extreme demand avoidance questionnaire, it comes straight up, and it's a free downloadable PDF, and the scoring tool is attached to it.
Yeah. It's just a question, when they go into different characters or animals, do you think that the adults should go along with those characters in order to get them to do what you're asking of them?
Yes, I do. Because if they don't need to use them, they won't use them. And it's an opportunity for you to actually interact with them in a different way. So, oh, we've got a kitten here today. I'm wondering what a kitten needs to feel strong and safe. I'm wondering what they might need. Now they're going to need some milk and they're going to need some food. I wonder if this kitten likes milk and how milk feels in the kitten's mouth. And they'll say, no, the kitten doesn't like milk. So you can actually have quite an in-depth conversation with them. And when they don't need to use that persona, they won't. They'll use it when they need it, though. We often see baby talk emerge, and talking like a baby or talking like a character. And that gives us a clue. And that's when we can use those I wonder if kind of inquiries and non-declarative language. So we'll put a link to some resources there and some books that are really helpful to look at as well. Any other thoughts or questions?
There's lots of comments, lots of things being said.
Right. No worries. Oh, chat away amongst yourselves. It's great. Love it. All right. So, leading practice in interventions has come from PDA UK, and they have the most incredible resources available on there for free. Just amazing things. So they have information sheets that you can give to teachers. They've got information sheets that you can give to medical professionals. So you can email them to a clinic. You can email them to your GP. You can take them to your GP. It just really lots of helpful resources there so that you don't have to try and explain it all before you get in the appointment. You can go to a doctor's appointment and you can hand an envelope over to the receptionist with an information sheet in it, and you can hand it to the receptionist and say, I've just got a letter here for the doctor before we come in. And then the doctor can have read this information before you go into the appointment, and it could be really, really helpful. So I just really want you to know that a lot of the next lot of information has come from this website, and also a book by, let me just find the book. My Puppies Chewed, my new book. I'm so disappointed, but it's by Raylene Dundon, and it is called PDA in the Therapy Room. And Raylene is from Okie Dokie Therapy here in Melbourne. And she's an amazing therapist. She's got 2 huge clinics. So if you're a therapist and you're looking for lots of great information, PDA in the Therapy Room by Raylene Dundon. But just don't let your puppies get a hold of it. It's not actually helpful. All right, so PDA UK has developed this great mnemonic, Panda. And the panda is actually their like little mascot that they have. So they talk about picking your battles, managing anxiety, negotiation and collaboration, disguise and manage demands, and adaptation. And just keeping going around and around and around. It is a whole change in mindset managing a child with PDA, because the strategies that you would normally use for a child with anxiety, with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, don't work. And it becomes really confusing for parents and carers and educators, because we go, okay, this child's got a diagnosis of autism. I know what to do for autism level 1. I know what to do with autism level 2. I know how to manage autism level 3. I know that visual schedules are really, really helpful, and they always need to know what's coming next, and they need lots and lots of warning. They need everything very structured, and they need to be very clear and direct in my communication. And that is absolutely correct for autism. However, for a child with PDA, that just totally overwhelms them. So they're not actually sure if they can do the first thing on the daily schedule, let alone all of the other things coming after that. So they become overwhelmed. So you might have a daily schedule that says map time, and then reading circles, maths, fruit break. Then we're going to do some of our integrated unit, and then we've got specialists. So we've got to go over to the hall for PE. Then we've got lunch, and then this afternoon you're all off to the art room. And so you might have that all as a visual schedule. You might even have some great movement breaks in there and time with their sensory box, but they might even see that they've got a movement break and they're going to have time with their sensory box, and they will become overwhelmed because they're not sure which sensory tool they're going to need then. So they then can't do the first thing on the list. So they become totally overwhelmed by that. The other thing that we do is we use first then. So first schoolwork, or first writing a page of writing, then you can have your sensory break. And so the demand is first, the reward is second, and that can become overwhelming as well. So when we're thinking about supporting a child or a young person who's got PDA, we still use visuals. They still are well supported by visuals, but it might be that you put on a visual thing, okay, there's a couple of things that would be great if we could get to them today. One of them is doing a math sheet, and one of them is you having a sensory break and having a snack. I'm wondering what order you feel you might be able to manage to do these things in. And they might say, I need a snack. And it might be 9:01, but if they say they need a snack, then you let them have a snack. If they say they need a sensory break straight up, then you let them have a sensory break. And I can hear some brains going, oh no, that is giving them too much control. That's enabling inappropriate behavior. We are not going to do that. That is not okay. And if we come at it from an attachment theory basis, we would never give a child that much power. And we wouldn't want them to be doing that, because we're not being the adult, we're actually giving the child too much responsibility. However, nothing could be further from the truth, because we as the adult have made the decision that it's okay for them to have a choice. And we have set the parameters of the choice. We are not enabling anything. We are still absolutely still supporting them to be safe with having disability appropriate choices. They're not deciding that they can choose what order things go in. We're deciding that it's appropriate for them to have a choice of two and to put them in the right order that works for them in that moment. But we as the adult have set those parameters, so we're not actually giving them too much responsibility, and we're not enabling inappropriate behavior. Thoughts or questions? No? All good?
I've got loads of thoughts.
Okay, fire away, Karen.
I'm just wondering how that works in a normal classroom. And, you know, you've got a whole mixture of kids, some with ASD who need the visual schedule, like the teacher nearly needs to split themselves in half. I'm just wondering how that works.
Yeah, look, it is really, really difficult, and that's exactly what's required. And you can have, often on a visual schedule, you have your Velcro, and you put your visual schedule, so they would have both exactly the same kits, and you would do a full visual schedule for one child, and you would just do choices for another.
Yeah, we've just got a couple of comments. Are you saying we shouldn't be using first and then as a technique, from Natalie? And then from Sharon, it's tough on the students.
It really is tough on the students. So Natalie, it's a great question. For kids with PDA, first and then, yes, still use it, but you negotiate and collaborate with them about what's first and what's then. So it may be that they do their choice thing first and then they do the task. Now, I can hear you go, oh, then they won't do what I want them to do. But one of the things about kids who have PDA, they actually have a great deal of integrity. And if you negotiate and collaborate with them, maybe 6 times out of 10, they'll actually be able to follow through and do what you want them to do as well. But if they can't, they won't. It is a bit of a tricky thing. So first then still works well, but you've got to collaborate. And that's that negotiation and collaboration to solve challenges.
Okay, Natalie's saying she's understood.
Great. Excellent. Anything else urgent there?
What's your thoughts on prize maps?
Hate them. Because it's a demand. Because if I can't do this, I'm going to miss out on the prize. And then it becomes a form of punishment. Yeah. Look, for kids without PDA, for kids that have got ODD, I think prize maps are great. And but only to address one particular behavior for a short period of time. And the reason I say that is because our capacity as adults to sustain the consistency over a long period of time, to make token economies and prize maps work, we can't sustain it. And so then it loses its viability. But around a particular thing, I think it's amazing, but not for kids with PDA.
Okay, there's just a couple of other things. What if they refuse all suggestions and negotiations and just choose brain breaks every single time?
That is a communication to you that they truly are not coping. And so it's okay. You are letting me know your body is just not coping today. So today we are just going to do brain breaks all day if that's what your body needs. It's counterintuitive, but it actually does work. But I would be working with a professional around that as well, who has a good understanding of PDA, because there's other things that need to be happening in the background as well.
Sarah made the comment, I have found when we gave the brain breaks, a few weeks later, we saw improvement. When I let go and gave over to his choice, we saw significant improvement.
Yeah. Because the sense of being overwhelmed and their whole world being out of control lessens. So their their emotional capacity to tolerate things increases.
It's a real brain flip.
Oh, totally. It really, really is. All right. So it's about adjusting your mindset. It is totally adjusting your mindset. So when we think about the things that we need to be considering is rebalancing your relationship and aiming for a more equal power balance, which is counterintuitive as adults because we have more responsibility, but allowing them to feel like they can negotiate and collaborate. Managing your own anxiety and accepting that some things just can't be done and that you are not going to be able to achieve the same academic outcomes with a child with PDA. And you are not going to be able to get the accessible outcomes that you're looking for as an educator, and that you've got to focus on the long game. And that is really, really hard. And if you've got a child that's school refusing, schools, everybody wants them back at school. You want them back at school. School wants them back at school. They want to be back at school. And they will negotiate and they will agree and they'll even go for a day. But then the demand of that success becomes so overwhelming. They might not be able to go for a term or two again, or then they might be able to go for an hour a couple of weeks later. I don't think that we fully have good insight into how overwhelming going to school is for them. And often they're coping with those implied demands of their body as well. And having to go to the toilet at school, having to eat at school, having to drink at school. It's really, really huge for them.
I think even if we can understand, it's just that we don't have any other alternative.
No.
So what do we do?
What do we do? And, you know, I know lots of parents that have got kids at home and, you know, I've had my grandson at home since week 3 of term 1 and managed just to get him back at school. And he's been back at school for half days for a week and 1 day. And now he's on a 5-day suspension from his new school, from a huge meltdown today. It's hard yards when they've got PDA. It is really, really difficult. It is beyond words. There are no words to actually describe how distressing it is for parents, carers, grandparents, therapists. It is just really, really hard. We've got to try and be flexible. I'll admit at the moment, I'm not seeing positives. I'm just going to be really honest with you. I am not feeling the love right now. And supporting and caring for yourself. And this has been a real growing and learning space for me. And it's not an easy space to be in because I've always had this sense that once I've got everybody else sorted out, then I'll look at me. But what I've learned in the last 6 to 12 months is that is an implied demand. So there's an implied demand on that, on my grandson, is that I can't be okay until he's okay. And he has got no capacity to be okay. So he actually carries the responsibility of me being okay on his poor shoulders. And I have not intentionally put that demand on him to be okay so that I can be okay, but that's actually what I've communicated. So this year, I have totally flipped my self-care and I am absolutely prioritizing my self-care to take that responsibility off him and also off my husband. So I've kind of said, oh, I can't take time for myself because that is too much for my husband. I can't do that. But I've then put the responsibility for my self-care on my husband. And that's not fair either. And that's been a big mind flip for myself. And it's a growing space that I'm in, and it's a learning journey. And as you guys know, I'll be transparent with you about what I'm working on and what I'm working through, because I want you to know that it's not an easy journey for anyone.
No, thanks for sharing that, Bobbi. Sarah just came up with a statistic that the PDA UK site says that 70 to 80% of PDA kids are homeschooled.
Yeah, it's a true story. I've just seen the time, and I'm at slide 13 of 29. So what I'm going to do is I am going to stop, and we will do a part 2 of this webinar next month. I'll bump what we had planned for next month, and I'll do part 2 next month. And that's where I go into how to support the underlying difficulties, how to deal with distressed feelings, how to mirror their level of distress, and we'll do part 2 next month.
Cindy's asking if we can have part 2 already, I think, as part of the...
Can I keep going now? I have got a full book of clients tomorrow. And if I keep going now, you are not going to get the best of me, and you're going to be tired tomorrow as well. So Cindy, yes, but no, but yes.
Would you think it'd be a good idea, Bobbi, if we say about next month's webinar that people need to watch this one because you're just going to start from...
Yes, that's a great idea. Yeah, we'll do that. Please have watched this one because we're going into part 2. Then I don't have to recap anything, and we start from slide 14.
Yes.
Sound like a plan? Now, are there any urgent questions?
Lots of comments that they can't wait for part 2. That's been a huge eye-opener. Lots of sadness about the homeschooling bit, and it's not a small topic, and it's a really hard one.
It really, really is. It is really, really hard. Yeah. I haven't got words, Karen. It just sucks.
Yeah.
It just sucks. And I'm not saying I've got all the answers, because I'm living it and I certainly don't have all the answers, but there are some things that work better than others.
Sarah's just saying that they have an amazing school that is open to diversity in Adelaide. So it'd be great to see a school doing it well. I was thinking the other day, it would be really good. The school that I was involved in previously had certification for being a safe school. And I think it's great to have certification to be an autism school, like to have that certification.
Yeah. And look, through positive partnerships, the education department has had a lot of PD to be a safe autism school, and to be a school in Victoria that your staff have had all the autism training in it. And so there kind of is that around autism, but not around PDA and the PDA profile. Because everything that you do for a child with PDA is basically the opposite of what you would do for a child with just your class. There's nothing just about it with normal autism, if you can say that. Yeah. Anyway, everyone, bless your hearts. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's so wonderful to have you here. And we will see you next month for part 2, going from slide 14.
That's so great, Bobbi. Thank you. Jolene's just put something exciting there. They're opening up TEP next year, Tailored Education Program for Students with ASD. That's great, Jolene.
Oh, yes. And I'm so excited to see you here tonight, Jolene. It's so lovely. And just thank you, everyone, for coming. I'm just looking through the names now and see lots of names I recognise, and it's great to see you. And lots of new faces as well. It's lovely to have you here tonight. Thanks, XJ. Love that you come and join us. It's wonderful. I really love it. And I'm not sure what the time difference is, so I hope it's not too terrible for you. All right, everyone. Great to see you as well, Julie. All right. Bless your hearts, everyone. Good night. Bye.
Night, Bobbi.
Good night. Thanks, Kez.